So I've struggled with procrastination for my entire life and have had a very difficult time trying to overcome it. So if you feel that you keep postponing important things and you feel also that you've tried every single productivity hack on the internet but you still don't see results, I think this video could be really helpful. I found some really weird and unconventional productivity methods that target procrastination specifically. But before we start, I wanted to specifically talk about procrastination because I think a lot of us have a faulty perception of what procrastination actually is, and I think understanding the problem that you have is very helpful in trying to tackle it initially. So I found an article on Psychology Today that states that it has long been believed that people who procrastinate have a faulty sense of time. And while that may be true for some, the article says more recent research suggests procrastination is linked to difficulty managing distress. And it seems that people are task averse because they feel uncomfortable in doing that task now and taking that responsibility on now, so they postpone that into the future. But that postponing only leads to more negative sentiment and more stress down the line, which creates this self-fulfilling cycle where you keep postponing and postponing and postponing and postponing, and then just stress builds and builds and builds and builds. So it's not necessarily an issue of being lazy or necessarily an issue of just postponing things because you postpone things, but it's a lot to do with how you handle your emotions, how you handle stress, how you handle anxiety. And the people who have a harder time managing these emotions are more prone to procrastination. So I think understanding that is a super helpful jumping off point to this video and to understanding procrastination in general. Hola amigos, I'm Diego, a software engineer working in London, and if you're interested in reclaiming your time from digital addictions or supercharging your productivity, make sure you subscribe and join the team. Let's get into it. Identifying your core mission and values is one of the most important ways to not fall into procrastination. Because I think a lot of us nowadays, and the internet has fueled this as well, I've seen a lot of content that is what they call, I think hustle porn in LinkedIn, where it just seems it's productivity for productivity's sake and just working and working and working and working and working. That's not very useful for a lot of us. Some people have that crazy capacity to just sit down and work and just execute, but a lot of us don't have that superpower, I guess. A really important way to actually be productive and avoid procrastination is feeling personal attachment to the work you are doing, feeling that the work you are doing is actually important and moving the needle, and having a sense of passion and ownership over what you're actually working on. So I've worked many jobs in my life, and for a lot of them I was just working because I needed to work. I needed the money, and I wanted to develop some personal skills, professional skills. Nowadays I try to focus a lot more on what I'm passionate about. So this YouTube channel, for example, is something that I'm very, very passionate about, and it doesn't feel like work. To me, it feels that I'm adding a little bit of positivity, making a small change, hopefully in the lives of the people who watch any of these videos. So that gives me the motivation I need to avoid procrastinating on. And I found an exercise by Greg McKeown, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He wrote Essentialism, the book Essentialism. It's a beautiful book. It's one of the books that has most informed the way in which I understand work and what I spend my time on. I'm gonna leave it linked down below. And he has a really, really cool exercise or thought exercise that you run through on his website. I'm gonna leave it linked down below as well. It's called The Most Important Hour of Your Life. He talks about asking these questions that kind of change your structure of values and how you are viewing your own life, how you're viewing your present, your future. It redirects your life in terms of aligning those values, your passion, and what you work on. So some of the questions are, for example, what would I do if I only had a week left to live? Or what would I do if I only had a month left to live? I really recommend all of you go through that exercise and really sit down, go to a park, maybe write it down, pen and paper, old school. I know it seems a little weird, but I haven't written on paper in a very long time, but I think it's very useful. It's such a great way of aligning your values, your passion, and everything, so that at least you have a game plan. Maybe not now, maybe now you can't leave that crappy job that you're currently in, but maybe slowly you can transition out of it or do things that are a little more interesting or that you're more passionate about. Because when there's passion and when there's commitment and when there's that ownership in terms of your work, procrastinating is very, very difficult. The next thing I would recommend is to really focus on breaks and having effective breaks. And one of the coolest ways to do this is focusing on breath work during your breaks. This probably sounds a little esoteric or new age or whatever, but being very conscious about your recovery time between tasks and between projects is very, very helpful. And breath work is a beautiful way to slow down, take stock of what just happened, prepare yourself for the next thing, and not rush into another task, not rush into another commitment or another responsibility, because I think the world is so designed for us to go at maximum speed all the time that many of us don't specifically target recovery periods, be it between projects during the day or even at night sleeping. So using those breaks in between tasks to take 5-10 minutes of just disconnecting a little bit, just breathing in, breathing out, just focusing on your breath for 5 to 10 minutes is really, really powerful. I don't do it as much as I want to, but the times when I've done it, it's been really, really transformative in securing that recovery and that rest period is useful and as effective as possible. And I'm gonna leave the Wim Hof breathing method down below. Wim Hof is that crazy, I think, Scandinavian fellow who jumps into cold ice rivers and takes people on these weird pilgrimages where they're walking barefoot in icy mountains. He's a really cool cat, and his breath work and breath exercises are very interesting, very useful. They've worked for me, so I'm gonna leave them linked down below so that whenever you have a break period, you can focus on restoring your capacity to focus, restoring your energy, because when we're energetic and we can sustainably maintain, again, that motivation, that energy, that productivity throughout time, it's a lot more difficult for us to procrastinate. Your willpower sucks, so stop relying on it. This is something I'm very, very passionate about. I've been talking about this for many years. And as I mentioned, I've dealt with procrastination a lot in the past. And for a very long time, I was relying entirely on my willpower to resist the temptation of the phone, the social media, the video games. We're gonna fall. If it's easy to grab your phone and in 1 second you're on Instagram, you're gonna fall. If it's as easy as turning on a video game console, you're gonna fall into that temptation, and then that just leads to procrastination and just more anxiety and stress down the line. So what I've been talking about for a long time, and I think it's really, really effective, is to stop relying on your willpower and create systems that have enough friction so that it's very difficult for you to access Instagram. It's very difficult for you to access a video game. It's very difficult for you to watch Netflix. So this phone, for example, it's a super dumb phone. I can't do a lot of stuff on this phone. It doesn't have many apps. The only apps that I actually have are basically for work and, well, calling and things like that. I've blocked this phone and made it as dumb as possible to create those systems that have enough friction so I don't fall into the temptation of the social media or binging YouTube for 3 hours, which I used to do in the past. All of these digital distractions are specifically designed to keep us hooked and keep us plugged in, essentially. So there's a few quick tips that I would like to recommend, and one of them is to use website blockers. I've used website blockers for a few years now, and they're incredibly useful because they block down your computer or your phone even. That way you can't access certain websites. You can set timers for this, so perhaps during work, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, you block certain websites that are distracting, or maybe there's a certain website that you simply don't want to access ever, and you can have it blocked forever, and then it's impossible for you to access it through Safari or through any app. This is game-changing for me. I use an app on my laptop that's called Turkey Blocker. This is an incredible app, super personalizable, and I have a lot of distracting websites in there where I essentially block it down, and whenever I'm working, they're blocked. I can't access them. And sometimes when I'm outside of that work scope, or I want to perhaps watch a video on something, or maybe go into Reddit or whatever it is, I unblock it. It takes a lot of effort to unblock because there's a code that you need to write, a very long code that maybe takes between 2 to 4 minutes. It's a super helpful app, Turkey Blocker, and it's paid, but it's very high quality. It's just one-time payment, so it's not a subscription, which is I find very, very useful. I don't want to be plugged into another subscription. But if you're interested, I'll leave a few other options down below. I know there's one called Freedom as well, which is essentially the same concept. I'm gonna leave them down below. Definitely take a look at them and pay for them, download them if you're serious about avoiding procrastination. Another thing that I would recommend if you have an iPhone specifically, I think Android has a similar function, but it's using screen time to create those barriers, to create that friction in the same way that perhaps we would do it on our laptop with apps like we just mentioned, Turkey Blocker and Freedom. The screen time is a very helpful way of blocking out distracting websites like Reddit, social media, whatever it is, where you can prevent your phone from downloading those apps or prevent access to certain URLs inside Safari or inside Chrome. This is what I do. This is why this is such a dumb phone, and it's to support us in our goals and objectives and prevent us from falling into the procrastination trap. The microburst method, I had no idea this existed. I was familiar with the 5-minute rule, where whenever you want to procrastinate, you sit down and you work for 5 minutes to get into the mood of working and perhaps create enough momentum to actually continue the task. But this microburst method is even more radical than the 5-minute rule. This microburst method essentially asks you to only try and work for 2 minutes. Sometimes for me, 5 minutes seems like a lot, so this microburst method was, I guess, an alternative to the 5-minute rule. So the microburst method states, sit down. If you don't want to work, if you don't want to get a task done, just sit down, put a timer for 2 minutes and start working on it. The barrier or the psychological barrier to entry is lower here. So for a lot of us that suffer from really chronic procrastination, finding it very difficult to even start tasks or even sit down to begin begin things, I think it's super useful. Just put that timer, 2 minutes. I think all of us can probably spare those 2 minutes, and it's not gonna take that much effort. Hopefully after those 2 minutes, we build up that inertia, that momentum, that motivation to just slowly chip off at that next task. Good enough is better than perfect a lot of the time. Procrastination is definitely fueled by perfectionism in many cases. I know a lot of people are perfectionists and are quite obsessive about the degree of quality of their work. And I've definitely faced this in the past, where perfectionism has prevented me from even starting tasks, because tasks seem so much more large and overwhelming when you want everything to be perfect. So sometimes you don't even begin tasks because of that perfectionist mindset. And I think trying to change our psychology around perfectionism is a very useful way of avoiding procrastination, because in a sense we have to realize that our work is never going to be perfect, and that a lot of the time good enough right now is a lot better than perfect in the future, which again is just simply unattainable. But the speed at which we execute, even if it's not perfect, is super valuable, because things move forward. At least we're stumbling forward, not in the perfect manner, but at least we're moving towards a goal. And a lot of the time your perfect work is perhaps going to be changed or going to require some changes. So things are always changing, things are always dynamic. So obsessing about creating perfect work is not as useful as trying to iterate on things and trying to change things as fast as possible and execute as fast as possible. I think there is a lot of value in speed as opposed to things being perfect. There's a concept in economics called diminishing marginal returns, where the returns that you get from a certain activity in the beginning, your time investment, your energy investment, in terms of quality, for example, the more you invest, the more you are getting that return on investment. But at a certain point, it starts to plateau, and a lot of the effort or input that you're putting in is not making any more significant changes. And that's where I think perfectionism really suffers, because a lot of the people keep tinkering with work after that plateau phase. And after the plateau phase, your changes are not making great impact. So understanding that you definitely, with every project and everything you task or responsibility you're involved with, there is a point of diminishing marginal returns is very useful to know, so that you can avoid continuing work on that task after you've reached that point, because it is preferable to spend more time on doing more important things and other tasks and moving forward, as opposed to spending that same amount of time just marginally changing the quality of something. And the great way to ensure that you don't procrastinate because of perfectionism is to plan ahead of your tasks and set a strict time limit in terms of how long you're going to spend on that task. This allows the task to be contained, not for it to spill over and just dominate your life. Make sure you take a few minutes before every task, set an actual time limit, an artificial deadline in a sense, and make sure you know what you need to accomplish. And that's going to be, again, it's a great antidote against procrastination. And I just wanted to close off this section with one of my favorite quotes of ever, I think, by the US General George Patton. A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. So if you like this video and you feel that you could use a little bit more energy, a little bit more motivation at work, definitely check out this video on the 4 habits that I implement whenever I feel stuck at work. Again, thanks for watching everybody, and see you there.